Hello, once again, everyone. I'm Philip Landers. I teach the auditorium Bible study class when we meet. Though, for those in person here at First Baptist Church in Cave City, looking forward to the day when we can all meet and have that class together. Until then, thank you for tuning in for our online Bible study as we continue looking at the book of Revelation. We're looking at chapters 13 and 14 this week. Next week, we will actually look at 15 and 16. The following week, we'll look at 17 and 18 as we pair some of these up because they just go together. And I think we can do that and get away with it, so to speak. So before we get started, I want to remind everyone to continue to remember all those who need our prayers right now, the families of those for the sick and for those who have lost loved ones. The COVID affecting, of course, everything. And we just pray for everyone that needs to deal with that in any way, which is everybody. And so let's just keep that up. All right, let's get started now here. And we've been looking here for a few chapters at what we might call the details and backstory after we looked at the trumpet judgment. So the abomination of desolation is that fixed midway point of the week, the 70th week, and we kind of have that clearly defined for us. We read in Mark 13 about events that come after that abomination of desolation. We call that second half of the week the Great Tribulation. Daniel called it the time of Jacob's trouble in Daniel chapter 12. We looked at the trumpet judgments in chapters 8 and 9, the first 6, that is. And then we've been going through the details and the backstory for chapters 10 through 14. And we'll kind of finish that little section, you might call it, today. Last week, we looked at the woman, which was Israel, and the dragon, which was Satan and his eternal crusade to derail God's plan, which goes through Israel. Remember, everything revolves around Israel, and that includes especially this book. So what we have today are the two beasts of Revelation chapter 13. Many people call them the Antichrist and the false prophet. Then we have some announcements, so to speak, in chapter 14, but at least part of that relates directly to what we see in chapter 13. So the term Antichrist, and we hear that a lot when people think about the end times, and we should, but it is a title that we have given that we collectively to this person at the end of time who is going to lead the earth in rebellion against God, the man. But through the New Testament, it's not specifically used as a title. John uses the word in 1st and 2nd John to refer to someone who does not believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. That is Antichrist. And so this man that we're going to see today is kind of the epitome of that, in that he's going to proclaim himself God. And so he has become then known as the Antichrist, but you won't find that reference specifically as a title in our New Testament. And we're going to meet two men or beasts as they're referred to today. Some people will refer to the first beast in chapter 13 of Revelation as the Antichrist, but others consider the second beast to be. And our quarterly does a great job of pointing out that both of these men are in the spirit of Antichrist, as John describes in his first two letters. Let's start with 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. There's a couple of verses here when we think about the Antichrist. We haven't talked about these verses yet, but they are worth reading because they fit what we're talking about today. And I would submit that they fit the first person that we're going to meet. And that's actually the way I will put it to you today, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong about a lot of things. So let's read these. Paul wrote, "Let no man deceive you by any means, For that day shall not come except, and he means the kingdom, the end, there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. And that's a phrase, by the way, that refers to Judas Iscariot also. Some people think he's going to somehow come back from the dead and be the Antichrist. I don't, but some do. Verse 4, Paul said, this son of perdition, this man of sin, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sits in the temple of God, showing himself to himself that he is God. That's your abomination of desolation that we read about in chapter 9, chapter 12 in the book of Daniel. We're going to see it mentioned here again today. So Revelation chapters 13 and 14, we're talking about the Antichrist and the false prophet. If we wanted to just sort of summarize these chapters, we would say that we're going to see a one world government that flourishes. The Antichrist is going to flaunt himself. The false prophet will force worship of the Antichrist. The lost are going to fall, hook, line, and sinker for all of it. But the saved, the redeemed, will find redemption. We'll see that in chapter 14. So before we read our first two verses, I want you to be thinking about Daniel chapter 2. The dream by Nebuchadnezzar, interpreted by God through Daniel, said there would be four great empires that would last until the end: Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And what we notice is in Daniel chapter 2, if you were to turn over and read that later, I encourage you to, the legs and the feet are considered one part of the statue, and it is considered one beast in chapter 7. We'll talk about that in a moment. But in chapter 2, verse 34, Daniel said that Nebuchadnezzar sawest till a stone, that's the stone cut without hands, that's Christ in his kingdom, smote the image upon his feet. What that means is that this last empire of Rome, the legs and then the feet, part iron, part clay, legs of iron, feet, part iron, part clay, was going to exist from the time it followed Greece unto the very end, which was from 168 BC until today. Now, the Roman Empire, as we think of it historically, came to an end in the 470s AD. However, some part of that empire has been prominent in the world ever since. England, or Britain as it was known at the time, was part of the Roman Empire. Some people see the United States prophetically as an extension of Britain. And so there's a million theories, aren't there, when we talk about Revelation? I mean, you can't count them all, really. So we're thinking about this empire here, that Rome is the last one, and it has lasted somehow the entire time. Daniel chapter 7, the same empires were listed as four different beasts. This last beast had 10 horns, which would mean complete rule. So now let's read chapter 13 in Revelation, verses 1 and 2, and then we will get into my incredibly busy little chart here. For those of you watching on your phone, I hope it's not too small, but I would encourage you to watch these on our YouTube channel, the church YouTube channel, and then you can have it on a computer screen or maybe your television, if you have a smart television, that you can go to YouTube that way. And then maybe it's a little easier on the eyes. So chapter 13, verses 1 and 2 in Revelation. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea. We'll just stop right here because we're going to back up a verse, because chapters and verses help us find things, but the Bible was not written that way. And sometimes there's a continuing thought that carries over from one chapter to another in our Bible, and we can miss that if we don't go back sometimes and read. So in chapter 12, and I'm hoping you have your Bible open, go back to verse 17. So we talked about the dragon last week. That was Satan, who had 7 heads and 10 horns, and let's remember that, who pursued Israel into the wilderness. This is after Christ or the child ascends to heaven. He turns his attention, the dragon does, to Israel, who flees. We've tied all that into the second half of the tribulation. And here in verse 17, the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. Remember that, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. And I stood on the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea. Now, I understand that there are some versions of the Bible that say the dragon stood on the sand, he stood, meaning the dragon. You may have a version that says that. It doesn't really take away because anything. We're looking at the beast here, and the dragon would be watching the beast to whom he gives power. And this beast has 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So 7 means perfect, 10 referring usually to world power, 7 heads, 10 horns, complete world rule for this beast. But remember, we're always talking about Israel, and there have been, and counting the last one, there will be 7 empires that relate to Israel. Egypt was the first, then Assyria, then Babylon by the time Daniel comes on the scene, and he looks forward to see Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And then we will have what many call the revived Roman Empire here at the end. That's 7. The beast here in verses 1 and 2 is going to refer to that Roman Empire, but also the man at the head of it. But you'll notice the other beasts are listed, but they're listed backwards to the order we saw in Daniel. So he had the feet of a bear, the mouth of a lion. He was as a leopard, was the first beast mentioned. They're reverse of Daniel because John, looking back in time, saw it opposite order of what Daniel saw. Very fascinating. The 10 horns, if you go back to Daniel chapter 7, we learn that the Antichrist was the one horn who replaces 3. If you try to tie all this together, so he rises to power politically. This beast has all the aspects of the prior beasts. He's like a leopard. He has the feet or the strength of a bear, the mouth of a lion. He's loud, the powerful, top of their kingdoms, so to speak. And so this empire is going to have everything great about it in man's view of every empire that's ever been. It's the once for all, best one ever. Okay? So this beast is the world empire, but it's also the man ruling it. And we were going to call this first beast the Antichrist today. His power comes from the dragon in verse 2, who gives him his power. Notice that's a singular man, but the beast rose out of the sea meaning the Gentile people. So a kingdom rises. There's a man at the head of it. This man has 7 heads and 10 horns, just like Satan. Satan rules the man rules the empire. He is wounded in verse 3. I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. Now, this is the same language that is used for the death of Christ in the Bible. And so this wound is possibly fatal or would normally be fatal, or it's completely fake. Now, down in verse 14, if we cheat ahead, the false prophet will force everyone to worship the beast. Look at the very end of the verse, which had the wound by a sword and did live. So this man is going to suffer a physical wound that should kill him. And either it does and he comes back to life, or he seems to, or the entire thing is a put on. Satan is a deceiver, always, first and foremost. So while we are all going to have our ideas as to which way it's going to go, everyone will be convinced that it's something to be amazed about. It says that the entire world, that's the seas, that's everybody, they worship the dragon, we'll see in verse 4, but all the world wounded after the beast. So the whole world sees this and thinks he either died and came back, or they've been totally fooled. He either does or it's fake. In verse 4, he's worshiped the dragon. They worship the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worship the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him? Notice that they're both worship. The world associates the two. Who is able to make war with him? The Antichrist by this time is militarily the superpower in the world, and they're going to flex that power through the false prophet, and the world is associating the two. Many people consider this to be Satan's unholy trinity. Again, he can only mimic or imitate God. So you have Satan and his Antichrist and his false prophet trying to replace God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Now he's described, let's read verses 5 through 8. We've got a long description of this first beast, this Antichrist. Notice he's given 3.5 years as we read, because that keeps coming up. We're in the second half of the tribulation. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. Think back to what we read in 2 Thessalonians to start our study today. Verse 7, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints. Satan's giving him his power, but God is allowing this to happen. War with the saints, and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. Now you can go back to Daniel chapter 11, and he has power over the world, but he does have resistance, because man ultimately will not completely, totally unite, at least until the very, very end after the kingdom, because they're ultimately all selfish and want to take care of themselves. And so Satan's pit that he builds for God, he's going to fall into himself. That's an Old Testament expression anyway. Verse 8, all that dwell on the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. So he's the abomination of desolation. He rules the world mostly, makes his war. The lost will worship, the saved will not. The saved are going to be strong enough that they spiritually will see and refuse, even to the point of death. And notice that it says the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Remember that everything in this book is all the end product of the fact that man is a sinner. And that when God said he was going to create man and a universe for him to live in, that he knew man would rebel and sin, and that he would take on physical form to pay the sacrificial price so that we would have a way to commune with him if we believe. It was all set up ahead of time. God knew every person who was ever going to live, every decision they would make, every thought they would have, and he still created us because he loves us. That's a pretty good thought. There's more description of the Antichrist for those of you who want to go back and read and try to put it all together. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 20, the one horn replaces three of the horns. He rises to political power. In Daniel chapter 11, we read that he has no regard for religion. He has no interest in women. Now, I'm going to stop right there, and I probably shouldn't. You know where I'm going already. I know you do. I can't help it. It's funny. Every president we have, someone thinks he's the Antichrist. And yet every president we have has been married. And there have been some, shall we say, unsavory comments made about not only Donald Trump, but Joe Biden for that matter, that I think we can attach those as true or not as they are fully, but they're still both married. The no regard for the desire of women description of the Antichrist simply doesn't apply to our presidents. It just doesn't. And so when someone says, well, our president is the Antichrist, well, this one line proves that he's not, in my opinion. I guess somebody could change their personality and change their attitude in that way so that by that time that's the case. But as far as someone right now, that one line is going to disqualify an awful lot of people. It says he worships a strange God. I wonder if we're talking about Satan here or if it's nature, it's religion in a way that hadn't been done before, perhaps. I think it will all make perfect sense to the people living in that time. And you find out that no one comes to help him in the end. He's going to meet a bad end because mankind in the end simply is not going to come together to that extent. They're all going to turn on themselves. He's a prince of the Romans in Daniel chapter 9, prince of the people who would destroy Israel later. That is the Roman Empire, which we see from Daniel chapter 2 is going to exist all the way through to the end. And so many people see him coming politically out of that group. And that makes a lot of sense. And then in 2 Thessalonians, he's titled the man of sin, the son of perdition. And so we say Revelation, a lot of people think Antichrist. There's a big heaping helping of Antichrist info for you. So who is he? I can't tell you. And I know a lot of people on the internet can say, oh, well, it's this person, it's that person. We don't know. I don't know anyway. Is he alive today? Well, maybe. You know, Hal Lindsey wrote a book in the 1970s called The Late Great Planet Earth. And he had everybody convinced that we were at the very end of time. And what happened? The Cold War ended, the Iron Curtain fell, and things changed a lot from then until now. And we'll talk about some of that here in a couple of minutes. And so we just don't know. We think we're in the time. It could be tomorrow. It could be next month. It could be another 30 years. Time has a way of slipping by. We can know that he's going to politically come out of what would be called the Roman Empire or a revived Roman Empire. Remember when the European Union was reestablished and there were 10 nations and a lot of prophecy studying folks kind of went crazy about that. And he's an ascending political figure. He's a big talker too. He's going to be something. He can say big things. He can rally a crowd. Now he's going to have an enforcer. He's going to have some help. And that is the false prophet, which we're going to read about in the second half of chapter 13 today. So let's take a look at that. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. And he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. Think about Satan. Dragon always referring back. He's got that power. Satan is giving him his power too. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had the power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. This guy can do some things, right? You know, Christ talked about that the very elect would be deceived if days weren't shortened, right? It's amazing what this guy in particular can do. And he had the power in verse 15 to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And so here we see the true power. And think back to Nebuchadnezzar, right? He put up the big statue and said, pray to the statue or you'll die. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused. They were thrown into the furnace and lived. It's really the same thing with Satan all the time, isn't it? It's just the same thing over and over. And he, that's our false prophet, causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save that he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here's wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So this mark of the beast, if you don't have it, the network that makes sure you do or you can't participate economically is all ran by this false prophet. He's a religious leader, and he's going to tell you that if you don't take the mark, you're going to die. So what is the mark? It's used to control commerce. We see that. Is it Bitcoins? Bitcoins, this electronic currency that a lot of people think that this is somehow tied in. Barcodes, some people think about, or microchips. There are those people who put microchips in their pets. Then they can track them down when little Fido goes out and doesn't come back on time. Some people think it's the MAGA, Make America Great Again hat. I've seen that on the internet because remember, that's that symbol on your forehead. For that matter, it could be a St. Louis Cardinal hat or a Chicago Cubs hat. I think we could all agree it's more likely a New York Yankees hat if it's going to be a hat, but we just don't know. Technologically, we have things in place today that 30 years ago did not exist. I submit to you that 30 years from now, if we're all still here or the world is still here, there will be something else that we don't know about today, which is totally commonplace then. And I think that you'll see that people think that is how it will be done. However it's going to be done, it will be done. And that's what we want to take away. So you take the mark on your forehead or your hand, or you can't buy and sell, you're going to be killed if you won't worship the beast. And so now we're going to move on to chapter 14. And notice we're going to have a contrast because these people don't take the mark of the beast on their forehead. Look what they have here in verse 1, chapter 14. And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written in their foreheads. So we can compare the first 6 verses of this chapter, and really more than that, through the first few verses of chapter 14. So we know that the dragon gives power to the beast, and there are some versions that say he stood on the sand. The beast comes out of the sea. That's the people of the earth. Remember that the Antichrist comes out of the earth. He had the names of blasphemy on his head, but so does the people who take the mark of the beast if they want to buy and sell. Speaks blasphemies, blasphemy of God in his mouth. Let's compare that to these 144,000. Let's read verses 2 through 5 now. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps, and they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne and before the four beasts. Remember those from way back? The four beasts with the different faces. And the elders, the 24 elders, remember them from way back? And no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. These are they which were not defiled with women. Remember, the Antichrist does not regard the desire of women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being firstfruits unto God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. Notice how the language is opposite to the Antichrist, and through him, the non-believers. This 144,000, remember the 144,000 from back in chapter 7, had the name of God in their foreheads. So this would be the same group who have been witnessing through the tribulation. Could be another group, but it seems to fit. And go back to chapter 12, verse 17. Satan makes war with the remnant of Israel's seed. That's your 144,000. They're giving witness to God. Notice that we see the natural in chapter 13. We see the spiritual in chapter 14. When we get into Genesis here in a few weeks, and I sure hope we're back doing this in person by then, but we're going to have to let this virus do what it's going to do. You see a lot of that, the natural, then the spiritual, and we see it again here. God is always going to show you the spiritual victory for those who believe, after showing us the natural man who will not be victorious. Okay, so let's talk about chapter 14 for just a couple of minutes here, and it probably deserves more time than we're going to give it, but we saw in the first 5 verses the 144,000 sealed by God. Notice the commendation, how they're bragged on. They are not defiled with women. They follow the Lamb. Go back to verse 5. They're found without fault. They're redeemed from the earth. God commends those who live for him. We should live for God. Okay. Verses 6 and 7, we see an angel, and he's going to fly in the midst of heaven, and he is going to have the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth. Now, remember, Christ said the gospel must first be preached unto all the earth before the end comes. And if it hadn't happened before now, it happens with this first angel. The second angel, verse 8, Babylon is fallen, and we're going to get more specifically into this reference to Babylon in chapters 17 and 18. And it's just all over. This just is an announcement that the world empire, its days are numbered. Now, it doesn't mean it's happening immediately as we read, but it's imminent. You're down 40 with 2 minutes to go in the game. You're just not going to win. That's the message to the world here. Verses 9 through 11, we have a third angel. The beast worshipers who took the mark are going to suffer punishment. And we'll read about that later on at the end of the book, but it is mentioned here in these verses. Then in verses 12 and 13, here's the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. We should live for God. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. Remember the church letters, right? Christ said, I know thy works to the churches. God knows what we've done. He wants to commend us for doing good things to represent him. That should encourage us to want to do that. The last 6 verses are really fascinating. And while we're not going to take a lot of time today to read these, it's looking ahead to that final judgment prior to the kingdom. It's referring to the battle of Armageddon. Verse 20 says, blood comes out of the winepress, even to the horse bridles, by a space of 1,600 furlongs, which would be, I think, 160 miles, I should say. Just massive death at that. And we're going to talk about that battle later. And so a quick look through chapter 14, that the first few verses really line up with chapter 13 and needed a few minutes today. The tribulation, if we think about the whole thing, and just to touch on this for a moment, remember that this ruler, this beast, is the rider on the white horse from the seal judgments we read back in chapter 6, that he went forth conquering and to conquer. And when he reaches the pinnacle of his power, he steps into the temple, declares himself God. That's the abomination of desolation there in red on your screen. It was in Daniel 9 and 12, and we read it here today in Revelation 13. And then all the things we've read about that take place in the second half of the tribulation, which is 3.5 years, the trumpet and vial judgments. We'll look at the vials or bowls next week. So the Antichrist establishes his world government, the prophet, the world religion. They're one and the same. They're combined. You take the mark or die under the religious one world government. There's war against the saints. Jerusalem trod underfoot of the Gentiles. Israel flees into the wilderness. And throughout it all, you have the two witnesses who are preaching against the Antichrist, who finally kills them, and the 144,000 servants, which we seem to have read about here in these chapters today, who are so highly thought of by God. And I hope God thinks as much of me someday when I meet him face to face. Takeaways today, trying to fit things into a tribulation scenario. It's really difficult because things change so quickly and time changes and countries do rise and fall. The Soviet Union, similar to how it was 30 years ago, but for a while it wasn't. Things can change, but we get one day closer every day. Remember that God and ultimately those who believe in him will prevail. And remember that everything is known by God. Go back to verse 11. I'm sorry, that's not the verse I wanted. It's the one where he was slain from the foundation. Verse 8 in chapter 14. The book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. God always knew how everything was going to go, and yet he still went through with it because he wants to commune with us. Notice how God shows the natural and then the spiritual. We see that at times through the Bible a lot. And the last takeaway is I completely overdid it this week and crammed way too much in here, but I guess it's just my nature. And you can always watch this more than once. I hope it's been beneficial to you. And next week, we'll talk about chapters 15 and 16, the last plagues. And again, thank you for all the kind words that you've sent my way. We'll be in this study for a few more weeks, and I hope you're with us all the way to the end, unless everything takes place. We could be raptured out tomorrow. Wouldn't that be amazing? And then we can watch it all unfold in the presence of the Father. Until we meet again, I want to say thanks again for watching, and God bless.